British Leyland during its time had some interesting collaborations, some successes like the Range Rover for North America, and disasters like the Allegro for Italy, known as the Regent, which practically sank in Innocenti. But there is one that is surrounded in mystery, rarely covered outside of specialist sites. This is British Leyland's Spanish collaboration with NMQ, and how one of British Leyland's most successful overseas operations ended in disaster, destroying its plant in Spain by a fire that ripped through it, crippling the operation, leading to its disappearance before it had even begun. An entire car manufacturer gone in less than a decade. Cars like the Authi Victoria and Authi Deluxe lost to time. This is the story of another BL collaboration, Authi, British Leyland for Spain, its rise and fiery end. Hello everybody and welcome to this video. If you're not subscribed already, please make sure to do so. It really does help me out and you get to see more of this. More history videos, more cars and conversions uncovered, and more projects like my Rover SD1 2600R. And the garage flood is finally fixed, so that's great. We'll be getting on with that soon. This video is on BL's operation in Spain and how it met its fiery demise. We cover cars like the Authi Victoria, one of the most beautiful 3-box saloons I've ever seen. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of these amazing cars? Do you think they could have succeeded in the UK? And do you have any British Leyland memories or any memories of BL in Spain? Make sure to like the video if you'd liked it, drop a comment below if you want to discuss it, and share the video if you want others to see it. But without further delay, let's get into this video on British Leyland in Spain. To understand Authi, we must first start in 1945. After the Second World War, Europe needed to rebuild. NMQ would be founded in 1948 by a merger of two Spanish companies. With their combined might, they would begin building engines for the Renault 4 CV, which was built under license in Spain by FASA. NMQ would begin to grow, it would expand and reinvest. Thanks to this, they would begin supplying all manner of components, from suspension to sub-chassis and steering components, continuing their relationship with FASA through the Renault 4, 8 and 10. NMQ's golden age was just beginning. But sadly, it wouldn't last. It would be cut short, thanks to its main customer FASA's parent company deciding that it was time to cut its reliance on NMQ. All orders for NMQ parts would be put on hold. The company was in a disastrous position. Without the customers to sustain their vast infrastructure, they were doomed. Spain at the time were industrially isolated. Its protectionist government imposed high tariffs on imports and made exporting particularly hard as well. This of course meant that NMQ, part of industry, was isolated as well. With a lack of diversity in their order book, they would need to find a new big-hitting customer. Other manufacturers at the time were partnering up, creating joint ventures to gain a foothold in the booming car market in Spain. Chrysler and all of the other major players had found their feet, but there was one that was quite late to the party. Meanwhile in the UK, BMC were lagging behind. Cars like the A35 were practically impossible to export to the continent. High tariffs were killing margins. The need for nations to protect their fragile industry was imperative to the survival of industry in those countries, and this was true of Spain as well. Other manufacturers had taken a different approach, as mentioned earlier. Renault had partnered with FASA to gain entry into the Spanish market. Land Rover had partnered with Santana to build the Series 2 in Linares. By 1963, BMC would see the writing on the wall. It needed to gain a foothold in this market. To get around the industrial isolationism, they needed a partner, and NMQ were ready. BMC, headed by George Harriman, would enter negotiations with NMQ to create another entity to build BMC cars in Spain. BMC at home had just begun its winning streak. ADO 16 had been launched and would start to see success. The Mini was beginning to take hold, a category-defining car. BMC had the cars, just not the capability to get them into Spain, but that would all change in July of 1965, when a deal was reached between BMC and NMQ to create Authi, which stands for this, and translated means English Hispanic touring cars. An investment from the two would establish a new factory in Landeben near Pamplona. Built in just 14 months, this incredible factory covered 200,000 square meters and would be created initially to build BMC's most successful model, AD016, in its 1100 form. In early 1966, the plant would start limited operations, and by June of that year, the first Spanish AD016 would be shown to the press, ready to take on the Renault 8. The Renault 8 was the dominant best-selling mid-range car at the time, and with Renault already gaining a foothold in the market, the new BMC AD016 had a heavyweight to contend with. That same year, the first 27 1100s would roll down the production line, preparing for ramping up the next year. In September 1967, the MG 1100 would be launched, but Spanish buyers would find it lacking. What did MG stand for? If it meant sporting, the 1100 surely didn't fit the deal. Long before the advanced automotive marketing of today, BMC and Authi's badge engineering was being thrown into question. The MG felt out of place, simply a better trimmed Morris. In spite of this, car production had ramped up massively. Cars were being produced at around 100 per day. Final production figures for 1967 would be 14,645, a massive change for a newly built plant. Luckily though for the MG badge in Spain, in 1968 it would see the new Mark II MG and Morris AD016 models. It would be launched as the 1300, upping the power and refinement. The MG finally felt like it had a right to wear the badge. Next would be the Mini. Introduced nearly a decade after its launch in the UK, the Mini would be introduced as the 1275C, a single carb version of the Cooper S, trimmed in leather with a dash-mounted rev counter. The new 1300 SMG would be launched as well. Production would be ramped up to 40,000 cars per year, gaining it a 5% share of Spain's car market. The plant would become independent. Only body shells were being imported from the UK at this stage. Engines and gearboxes were being manufactured by NMQ, while all other components were produced locally. All the stars were aligning for Authi. AD016 was a success. The Mini was its new volume small car, covering a sector of the market essential for growth. All of this at the time when the Spanish car market would be the highest growing car market in Europe. It seemed that Authi was unstoppable. Meanwhile, BMC and Leyland were coming together to form British Leyland, and would have ambitions to grow their unmanageable car empire even more. This would result in BLMC taking a 51% share in Authi, a controlling stake. Around the same time, BMC, now British Leyland, were working on a replacement for their successful AD016 range, their biggest money spinner at the time. BMC were interested in taking a Ford-style approach to the 1100 and 1300, an evolution rather than revolution of their successful range. The second coming of AD016 was beginning to take shape, but sadly resources at BLMC were being redirected to create the Maxi. They saw no need for this car. The new car, christened AD022, would be adopted by Michelotti, a renowned Italian stylist responsible for some of Triumph's greatest cars. A handsome three-box design would be created, but then abandoned by BLMC. Instead, British Leyland needed to reinvent the wheel with the Allegro as AD016's replacement. Leyland South Africa would be offered the fully finished prototype to take on as their own. They would use off-the-shelf parts and manage to finish off the design, using Triumph 2500 side pieces and standard universal fit Luxe head and tail lights. The body would only see one modification, a testament to the relevance of its original design. Air vents would be added to the C-pillars. AD022, abandoned at home, would see new life abroad. This car would be offered to Authi as the Victoria and be built locally in Spain. The car would emerge in 1972 and would be right on the money, a car of its time. The standard model would receive square headlights and a relatively modest trim. The upmarket TC and Deluxe would gain leather, wood and round quad headlamps. While the Victoria was looking good, its prospects weren't. The same industrial unrest that was destroying British Leyland at home was beginning abroad as well. The Pamplona factory would see some of its biggest strikes, and so would BL's other plants at home. The build quality of all cars was beginning to suffer. The name that was just being made had been tarnished. Its newly introduced 1275 Cooper Mini and its ADO 16 models were seeing record defects, resulting in buyers turning to Seat and other European manufacturers. The Victoria would see its first year of production slowed by productivity issues, and at one point a 1,700 worker strike that would result in a plant lockdown. BL had the same going on at home and now abroad. It was bleeding money. Even in spite of the unrest and the destruction of order, BLMC would expend more cash it didn't have, taking a 98.4% stake in Authi. British Leyland were focused on expansion rather than getting the fundamentals right. BL had the ambition for Authi. It stated to the press it would ramp up production to more than 140,000 cars per year by 1977. But the Spanish motor industry was in turmoil. An entire city would strike for the sake of 17 shop stewards. 20,000 workers would down tools. Spain's automotive industry in the 70s, much like Britain's, was in a death spiral. Just months after BLMC plunged millions of pounds into Authi, it began to build an exit strategy. The harsh reality of BLMC's situation was beginning to hit home. Build quality would destroy the reputation of the fledgling Authi brand and its new cars, such as the Victoria. Industrial relations would destroy the car's chances of being built properly, or even being built at all. In February 1974, Authi would introduce the reheated ADO 16, known as the Austin Deluxe. It was a more economy-focused Austin, with the same engine as the 998 Mini. But by then, BLMC was shaking at the foundation. Authi were too. BLMC was heading for bankruptcy. Authi was losing millions. British Leyland would seek to sell Authi. General Motors would enter the picture and begin talks to take over Authi, offering BLMC a distribution deal and guaranteeing the plant and its workforce for 3 years. But Ford would oppose this. Ford had begun talks earlier with the Spanish government to build its massive Valencia plant. The Spanish government would bow to this pressure. It seemed there was no end to Authi's troubles, but at least it had its largest asset, its 200,000 square metre factory in Pamplona. This status would be short-lived. October 9th, 1974 would see the final bridge to prosperity burned, when an accidental fire burned through the factory, costing BL and Authi millions and millions more. Rumours would swell around the origins of the fire, which officially is an accident. At the same time, the Victoria Mark II was being developed. This would be halted with several prototypes being produced and escaping into the wild. In the aftermath of the fire, it wasn't just the plant that was damaged, it was the local economy too. 1,700 workers would lose their jobs. By February 1975, it was all over for the Authi brand. It would file for suspension of payments to its creditors, citing the Spanish government's refusal to allow its sale to General Motors as the reason for its liquidity issues. Another company would also go bankrupt around this time, British Leyland. It would be bailed out by the UK taxpayer. May that same year, in 1975, the final Authi model would roll off the production line. Seat would purchase the plant in June. They would refurbish the factory and begin producing the Seat 124 from the newly refurbished plant. From the ADO 16 based cars built from 1966 to 1972, to the Victoria built on the abandoned ADO 22, to the Mini, and finally the Austin Deluxe, the reboot for ADO 16 for 1974 and 75. Authi had gone from zero to hero, boom to bust, in less than a decade. Its factory, scorched by fire, was repaired by Seat, and is now the site of VW in Spain. The brand itself and its intellectual property was purchased in 2010. It is now privately owned. The brand was similar in its fall to Innocenti's BL operation in Italy. Mismanagement and tragedy would call to a close BL's dreams abroad before they had effectively even begun. And that is the end of the video. What is your opinion on Authi BL in Spain, its rise and fall? Let me know in the comments below. But as always, thank you for watching, keep watching and remember to subscribe for more of this, and I'll see you in the next one.